Picture this: the Yellow River in April. The year is 1938. A woman stands at the water's edge, with 94 children behind her, and a bullet wound she has been refusing to acknowledge for 12 days. The mountains of Shanxi province are still visible over her shoulder, pale and cold against the morning sky, and somewhere in those mountains Japanese soldiers are looking for her. The price on her head is 100 yuan. The children range in age from 4 to 15. Some of them have no shoes. None of them have eaten since yesterday. The youngest have fallen asleep, sitting upright against one another on the riverbank, because their legs have simply stopped. There is no boat. The Yellow River is wide and fast and cold in April, carrying snowmelt from the mountain passes, and there is not a single boat on either bank. A boy named Suolan, 9 years old, who has walked for 12 days without once complaining, looks up at her and says, "I weda, did God not part the Red Sea for Moses?" She looks at the water. She has been in China for 8 years. She has walked into a prison riot armed with nothing but her voice. She has had audiences with the Mandarin of Yangcheng, with warlords, once with a Japanese official who did not know she was the woman his commanders wanted captured. She has done things that should not have been possible for a woman, with her background and her resources. One small impossible thing at a time, for 8 years. But she is not Moses. Her name is Gladys Aylward. She is 36 years old. She weighs perhaps 80 pounds, and what she does in the next few minutes will determine whether 94 children live or die. Comment below with, "God is still in the business of parting rivers," if you believe that what seems impossible to us is not impossible to Him. Stay until the very end. The 5 habits that made Gladys Aylward into the kind of woman who could stand at an impossible river and still have faith. They will shape you too. To understand how a person gets to a riverbank like that, you have to go back 34 years, to a kitchen in the north of London, and a girl who had every reason to believe she would spend her entire life being ordinary. Edmonton is a district in North London, not the Canadian one, though there is something worth sitting within that name for what this story eventually becomes. The London Edmonton where Gladys Aylward was born on February 24, 1902. Was working class in the way that working class meant something specific in Edwardian England. Decent people, quiet people, people who did not make demands of a world that had not offered them very much. Her father was a postman. Her mother kept the house. There was never money to spare and nobody pretended otherwise. She left school at 14. That was not unusual. You left school and you went to work, and for a girl in her circumstances, work meant domestic service. She became a parlor maid, then a scullery maid, learning to make herself useful and essentially invisible at the same time. She was small. She had dark eyes and dark hair, and a directness that made people consistently underestimate her. She was not someone that England in 1916 was training to do anything remarkable. And then she read something. A magazine article about China. About the immensity of the population and the almost incomprehensible smallness of the Christian presence within it. About millions of people living and dying without any encounter with the gospel. About how few people were willing to go. She was 17. She read that article and something inside her shifted in a way she would never fully explain. The way a bone sets after a break, you know it from the inside, even if no one else can see it. She began to save. A parlor maid's wages were not much. She saved for years a few shillings at a time. She applied to the China Inland Mission in 1929. She went to their offices in London and sat across from a committee of people who evaluated her and arrived, with a regret that was also a firm closing of a door, at the conclusion that she was too old to learn Mandarin. She was 27. She had no formal education. Her academic ability could not be counted on for the level of study the language required. She walked out of that office into a gray London afternoon. She could have stopped there. Anyone with a reasonable assessment of the situation would have stopped there. The largest missionary organization in the country had looked at her and found her insufficient for the work. The door was closed. The evaluation was official. Gladys Aylward went home, calculated what a train ticket to China via the Trans-Siberian Railway would cost. She could not afford a ship and kept saving. By October 1930, she had enough. The route she took should not be called a journey in any comfortable sense of the word. She left Liverpool Street Station on October 15, 1930, with a ticket, a suitcase packed with tinned food, and a small spirit stove, and a certainty she could not have justified to anyone on paper. She crossed Europe by rail. At the Manchurian border, she ran into active fighting. The Sino-Soviet conflict over the Chinese Eastern Railway had effectively closed the overland route. The train stopped. The other passengers turned back. She did not turn back. What happened in those weeks on the border, moving through stations that were military zones, catching rides where she could find them, spending nights in railway offices waiting for tracks to clear, is a story that sounds invented. She was 5 feet tall. She spoke almost no Russian and barely any Chinese, and she was entirely alone. She eventually reached Japan, could not stay in Japan, found passage to Tientsin, and made her way south by bus and on foot to the city of Yangcheng, in the mountains of Shanxi province, where an elderly Scottish missionary named Jeannie Lawson was waiting for someone, anyone, to come and help her continue the work. Jeannie Lawson was 73 years old. She was not easy. She had been in China for decades and had the edges you develop when you have been somewhere that long. Some worn smooth and others rougher than they needed to be. But she had a building on the mule trading route through the mountains, and a vision, and she needed a younger woman. They called it the Inn of 8 Happinesses. Yangcheng sat on a trade route. Muleteers moved their animals through the mountains for commerce and needed somewhere to stay. Jeannie and Gladys opened their gates, fed the men, stabled the animals, and in the evenings when everyone was full and tired, they told stories. They told them about Jesus. It worked, partly because Gladys turned out to be very good at stories in a way she had not known until she had an audience. She was expressive. She was physical. She held attention without effort. The muleteers laughed and came back and brought other muleteers. And the stories traveled the trade route the way all news travels trade routes, carried in pockets and on tongues. In 1932, Jeannie Lawson fell ill and died. Gladys held the old woman's hand through the last night. In the morning she was alone. The inn, the city, a language she had learned by total immersion in 18 months, and the question of what she was supposed to do now that the woman who had brought her here was gone. She stayed. In 1936 she became a Chinese citizen. The people of Yangcheng had already given her a name, Aiwede, the virtuous ones. She was reluctant to accept it, not from false modesty but from the weight of it. She was a girl from Edmonton whose best qualification for anything she had done so far was that she had not stopped. The Mandarin of Yangcheng gave her a role. The Chinese government had mandated an end to foot-binding, centuries of practice now illegal, and someone needed to travel village to village to inspect and enforce the new law. The Mandarin needed someone trusted, someone who spoke the language, someone who could enter the private rooms of women's homes. He gave the work to a small British woman from North London. She accepted. Those inspection journeys took her into every village in the district. She walked into homes and sat with women who had never spoken to a foreigner. And she listened to them, and she talked, and she brought the gospel into rooms where it had never been heard. She also brought back children. One at a time they came into her care. A boy found starving on a roadside. A girl sold by her family and bought back by Gladys for the same few coins. Children left behind by families that could no longer feed them. She gave them names and beds and meals and the first consistent safety many of them had ever known. She called them her children. They were. By 1938, she had nearly 100 of them. The Japanese had invaded China proper in 1937. In Shanxi, the front moved closer through that winter. Gladys heard artillery in the mountains. She watched the Mandarin's expression grow careful. She helped treat wounded Chinese soldiers carried into Yangcheng in carts, men with injuries she had no training for, and she did what she could with what she had and prayed over the rest. The bombing of Yangcheng came on a clear spring morning. She heard the planes before she understood what the sound meant, and then the explosions, and the inn. Her inn, the walls that held 8 years of stories and prayers and meals, was struck. She was in the courtyard when it happened. She pulled the children under the stairs and held the smallest ones against her, and when the smoke settled she stood and counted. She counted until she had every child, all of them, still there. After that, she began moving them to surrounding villages. She was crossing between Yangcheng and a nearby settlement on a mountain road when a Japanese patrol encountered Chinese soldiers on the ridge above. In the exchange of fire she ran, and she was hit in the back. She kept running. She told the children she had fallen. The oldest ones looked at her differently afterward and did not ask questions. The Japanese had posted a notice, 100 yuan for the capture of a foreign woman named Ai Wei, who was assisting the Chinese resistance. The notice went up in the cities. She learned the name of the man who had given her name to them, a Chinese merchant from a village near Yangcheng. She would not say his name publicly, then or later, but in the months she lay sick in Xi'an after the mountain crossing, she would say only this, that when she heard the name she understood why the body does not want to forgive. The knowledge sat in her like something with weight. She had lost the inn. She had spent 12 days in the mountains with a bullet in her back and 94 children she could not afford to lose, because of him. She prayed what she would later call a prayer, with nothing in it but the act of praying. Lord, I cannot carry this name. I am handing it to you, not because I feel ready, because I know that is what you do with stones. She never mentioned his name again. She did not know if he was alive or dead. She chose to give him to God, and then she chose it again the next morning, and the morning after, until the choosing became something she no longer had to think about. She would say, when asked about it in later years, forgiveness is not a door you walk through once. It is a road you choose every morning until you forget which direction the bitterness pointed. She gathered the children in April. 94 of them, 4 to 15 years old. They left Yangcheng on foot, moving north through the Taihang Mountains toward the Yellow River and the nationalist-held territory on the other side. Gladys carried the youngest on her back when their legs failed. The older children carried the smaller ones in turns. They moved by night when the roads were watched. They ate what they could find, grain from abandoned farms, river water filtered through rags. The mountain paths in April were not roads. They were animal tracks between rocks, sometimes nothing more than a suggestion of where a person could walk. Children fell. They got up. They moved in silence when she signaled silence and stopped when she signaled stop. On the 5th day, a Japanese reconnaissance plane flew low over the valley below them. The children lay flat behind boulders and did not make a sound. The youngest, a girl of 4 named Xiulan, began to cry. The child beside her, a boy named Bao, 8 years old, placed his hand gently over her mouth and held it there until the engine noise faded. He was 8. On the 9th day, the food ran out entirely. Gladys did what she had done in the inn when the muleteers were tired and discouraged. She told stories while they walked. She told the story of Moses and the Sea of Reeds, told it slowly, with all the detail she could make vivid, because she needed to hear it as much as they needed to. She told the story of Daniel in the pit, of Joseph in the prison, of the boy David standing in a valley with 5 smooth stones and a calm that had no business being as steady as it was. She told the stories to keep feet moving. She told them because somewhere in the telling she was reminding herself of what she had built her life on. On the 12th day they came down out of the mountains and saw the Yellow River. Wide and fast and cold, no boats on either bank. She stood at the water's edge and felt something she had not expected and would not describe to people for years afterward. A gap, not a collapse of faith, but a space between what she believed and what she could feel. In that moment, a distance she had not encountered before. Not in the prison riot, not at the Manchurian border, not in the bombed courtyard when she had counted her children through the smoke. This gap was different. It was the gap between what is true and what you can see, and it was wider than the river in front of her. And then Sualan looked up and said what he said about Moses. She had told that story 4 days ago, on a mountain with snow coming in sideways and children stumbling on stones. She had told it to keep them moving, and this child had been carrying it since then, in his 9-year-old chest, and he brought it back to her now without knowing what he was doing. She is not Moses, she knows this. She has a bullet wound and 80 pounds of bone and 2 empty hands. But she has never once stopped at a closed door. The China Inland Mission closed a door and she found a train. The Soviet Army closed a border and she found another route. Yangcheng had been full of people who looked at her and calculated her usefulness at 0, and she had made herself useful in ways none of them had anticipated. She has been built, by 8 years of small faithful acts, into someone who does not accept that closed is the final answer. She knelt on the riverbank. All 94 children knelt with her, without being told, because that is what they had watched her do every morning, for as long as they had known her, and the body learns what it watches often enough. She prayed with nothing in the prayer but need and the thinnest remaining thread of trust. 20 minutes later, a Chinese nationalist officer appeared on the far bank with a detachment of soldiers and a collection of boats. He had heard through the network of villages that moved news faster than any military signal that a woman was bringing children down out of the mountains. He had come to look for them. They crossed the Yellow River. She would say for the rest of her life that she had not parted anything. She had only knelt. God had sent the boats. They arrived in Xi'an, the city now called Xi'an, on legs that barely held them. Gladys delivered the children to a mission compound and collapsed in the courtyard. She had typhoid fever, relapsing fever, and a gunshot wound untreated for 2 weeks. She was delirious for days. A Canadian physician working at the compound, a Dr. Henry Shaw, said later that he had not expected her to be alive in the morning for any of the first 4 mornings. She was alive on all 4 mornings. The first thing she asked when she could speak clearly was whether the children were safe, all 94. She closed her eyes. The recovery took months, and she was never entirely well again in the way she had been before. The body carries what it has endured. She remained in China for the years that followed, working in refugee camps and rebuilt communities, 1 meal and 1 conversation at a time. When China fell to the communists in 1949 and the space for her kind of work closed, she eventually made her way to England and then, in 1958, to Taiwan. She was 56 when she began again in Taipei. She opened a home for orphaned children. She learned enough Taiwanese to preach in it. She kept going for another 12 years. In 1958, the year she went to Taiwan, a film was made about her life. The Inn of the Sixth Happiness, with Ingrid Bergman in the lead role. Gladys never warmed to it. They had given her a romantic subplot that had never happened, and she spent the remainder of her life gently correcting the record. "I had no time for romance," she said more than once, with the same directness she had had since she was a parlourmaid in North London. "I had children to raise." She died on January 3, 1970 in Taipei. She was 67 years old. She had left England with a train ticket, a suitcase of tinned food, and a certainty she could not prove to anyone. And she had spent 30 years in China, and changed it in ways that no government program and no military campaign could have manufactured. What made Gladys Aylward into the woman who could kneel at an impossible river and still hold 5 practices? She never named them herself, but they are visible across the whole length of her life, from the kitchen in Edmonton to the riverbank to the orphan home in Taipei. First, obedience before qualification. The China Inland Mission told her she was not equipped. She went anyway, equipped with nothing but the certainty that she was supposed to go. That certainty, tested at every closed border and every closed door, became the foundation of everything she did after. You do not wait until you feel ready. You go with what you have. Second, small faithfulness practiced without audience. The years at the inn were not dramatic. They were a meal and a mule and a story, repeated day after day, to men who had no particular reason to listen, the kind of faithfulness that no one photographs or records. What those years built in her was the exact endurance she needed on day 9 of the mountain crossing, when the food ran out, and the only thing she had left to give the children was a story. You cannot borrow faithfulness when you need it. You have to have been practicing it already. Third, choosing a people and staying chosen. She became Chinese, not as strategy, not as performance, but because she loved the people of Yangcheng with a love that made her willing to give up everything she had come from to stay with them. The Mandarin gave her work because she had earned trust. one village at a time, in a language that was not hers at birth but became hers by decision. There is no shortcut to that kind of belonging. You have to give yourself into it, and keep giving. Fourth, courage as a daily habit, not an emergency response. When she walked into the prison riot in Yangcheng, walked in, took the knife, told the men to stop, she was not operating on a surge of adrenaline. She crossed the yard because not crossing had simply not occurred to her as an option. The courage that can walk into a prison riot comes from 1,000 smaller moments of not turning back. It is built slowly in the ordinary days, and it is available when the extraordinary ones arrive. Fifth, surrender. She had given things up at every stage of this story. She gave up England and security, and the life her parents had reasonably imagined for her. She gave up the approval of the organization that had evaluated her and found her lacking. She gave up her name. She gave up her health on a mountain road in Shanxi, and in each surrendering there was a freedom she could not have found any other way. The woman who knelt on the riverbank with nothing had nothing left to protect. That is why her hands were open. You cannot receive what you are still gripping. There is something in this story that is easy to look past because we watch it from the outside. We see the miraculous crossings, the boats that appeared, the children who made it, and we place Gladys Aylward in a category that does not include ourselves. She was special. She was called. She had something we do not have. But she was a girl who could not pass the missionary entrance exam. She was a scullery maid who saved her coins. She was a woman who walked up to a closed door and knocked. The gap she felt on the riverbank, the space between what she believed and what she felt, is not where faith fails. It is where faith lives. It is the exact distance between what we can see and what we are being asked to trust. She did not close that gap by feeling more certainty. She closed it by kneeling anyway, with nothing in her hands and waiting. There is a river in your life with no boats on it. You know the one. You have been standing on the bank longer than you intended. You have a reasonable case for why this crossing is not possible. Gladys Aylward had a better case than yours. On a colder bank, farther from any help, with 94 children depending on the answer. She knelt. Comment below with, God is still in the business of parting rivers, if you are willing to kneel before the impossible thing in your life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next witness in this series. This week, write down the name of your river. Just the name, 2 or 3 words. Then pray one honest prayer. Lord, I cannot see the boats, but I am willing to kneel. Gladys Aylward knelt at the Yellow River in April 1938. She watched the boats come. Our next witness endured a different kind of impossible. While Gladys was crossing her river, a young pastor in Eastern Europe was being dragged into a basement he would not leave for 14 years. They tortured him to make him deny the name he had built his life on. He refused every time. He came out of prison, writing love letters to the men who had broken him. Next, Richard Wurmbrand.